The wind came off the water raw and salted, and I stood with my hands on the rail and let it scour my face. For 5 years it had been all the company I kept. Below my feet, the deck plates of the Odyssey shuddered. The Pacific rolled out to all compass points, a single sheet of hammered lead under a bone-white sky. I squinted at the horizon. It was out there, a speck that was slowly coalescing itself into shape. Ethel's Rock, an unspectacular name for a place that, according to our satellite data, had never felt the tread of a human foot. "See anything, Leo?" I turned. Captain Harlock stood there framed against the wheelhouse. The years had worked his face into a mask of sun-cured leather, and his eyes held the pale, washed-out blue of a winter sky. "Just the usual," I said. "A whole lot of water. You'd think the planet would have run out by now." He made a sound in his throat. "She's always got more to give, my boy. And always got more to take." Then the weight of his hand fell upon my shoulder, a graven thing of bone and callus. "Come on, Eris is about to give Marcus an aneurysm over a card game." I followed him into the galley. There, Eris Thorne was canted over the meager table, his spare form a study in bone and angled cloth, and all of his attention given to the matter at hand. He held a playing card forth in the gray light, pinched between two long fingers. "It is a statistical improbability, Marcus, that you would draw a third queen," Eris said, and his voice held no humor, but was the same flat and measured tone with which he would pronounce a man dead. The boy Marcus pushed a clot of nuts into his mouth and chewed with a grin that took up his whole face. He was young and held a certain faith in the surety of wires and numbered things and all the bright new arts of the world. "It's called skill, Doc, something you can't measure with a caliper. Riggs, our security for this mission sat apart from them in the gloom with a rifle broken down across his lap. He worked a dry cloth over the blued steel of the barrel, though it already held a dull perfection. He said nothing and did not look at them, but his presence in that place was a hard fact. He was a man made for a single purpose, and this purpose had scoured him of all else, and he sat there like some grim idol in his own dark chapel of violence. This was our crew, 5 men in a ship on the edge of the world. I was a senior field surveyor, which was a dignified title for what I really was. I worked for a company called Ethelred Geospatial and Ecological. In short, we were corporate prospectors, pioneers for hire. Governments, or men rich enough to be governments, would hire us to put our boots on the final blank spaces of the map. The Virgin Lands. We took their measure, soil and water, what grew from the one and what swam in the other, cataloged it all, and reported, finally, that the land was empty. Some wanted these islands to wall off and sell access to. Some wanted a reef to hide a yacht behind. Others I did not ask. It was not my place to ask. Our job was not to question the why, only to confirm the what, and more importantly, the what not. The what not was always the same. Man. In all our years of this work, the one thing Riggs was paid to find was the one thing he'd never had to look at through his sights. Harlock's voice came from the dark of the wheelhouse where he watched the slow accounting of the depths on a screen. "Approaching the shallows. Landfall in 2 hours, give or take." Aris slid the worn cards together and set them aside. The biomass readings were extraordinary. He said, "A completely isolated ecosystem. Think of it, Leo, flora and fauna that have never been cross-contaminated. New species, maybe even a new genus. And the island itself grew before us on the far edge of the sea and rose up a stone of ancient green. The sea broke against its foundations in a white fury. A high, thin whine started up as Marcus sent his preliminary drone aloft. "Signal's clear," he said, his eyes glued to the screen in his hands. "The topography looks aggressive. Central plateau, just like the initial scans showed. No visible structures, no smoke. No signs of anything man-made," Wildlife Eris asked. "Hard to say from this altitude. It's dense. I'm getting a few thermal signatures, but nothing big. Lots of avian life concentrated on the sea-facing cliffs. We found a breach in the western wall of the island, a dark cove where a line of offshore skerries stood against the sea. The beach within was a wound of black volcanic sand. It was the only way in. Harlock and Riggs took the first crossing in the dinghy as a kind of grim assay of that place. We stood at the rail of the Odyssey and watched them go. their small boat receding upon the gray water until it was only a mote crawling toward the immense and silent shore. They were gone for an hour. Then, the radio gave a crackle of static, and Harlock's voice came across that emptiness. "Beach is secure. Looks stable." We gathered the gear from its cases. The GPS transponders and the satellite phone and the solar chargers and all the empty cases, and then we followed them into the keep of the island. My boots made a sound on the black sand like grinding glass. The moment I stepped out, a silence fell over me and pressed in. It was not an absence of noise. The sea still hammered the outer rocks, but a presence of quiet. The jungle, which began not 100 feet from us, was dead silent. No insect chitter, no call of a bird, nor rustle of a beast. "Odd," Eris murmured, stopping at the edge of the tree line. He polished his spectacles on his shirt hem and stared into the wall of green, a jungle that vibrant. You'd expect to hear something. "Maybe they're all just shy," Marcus quipped. We spent the afternoon on a short tether from the beach, laying a base camp and a preliminary survey grid. Iris was in his element, kneeling in the dark, rich soil, his hands gentle on mosses and lichens he swore were unknown to science. He found a flower whose petals held the dark, bruised purple of a corpse lily and a shelf of fungus that seemed to pulse with a cold, internal green light. Marcus sent his main drone skating over the treetops. Riggs walked the perimeter, his movements economical and deliberate. Harlock raised the tents, his actions filled with the methodical competence of a man who had made a home in 100 wildernesses. And I fought off the feeling that I was being watched. It came on me strongest when I was at the creek. It was a freshwater seep that bled from the jungle's heart and stained the black sand of the beach a darker, wetter shade of black. I crouched to fill a water sample vial and saw it in the mud of the far bank. A carving. Dark wood, heavy and oiled by the water, no bigger than a man's hand. It was a figure, vaguely man-shaped but not a man. The limbs were too long, stick-like, and the head was a simple, deeply incised spiral. The work was crude, but the intent behind it felt ancient. I crossed the shallow, cool water and pulled it from the muck. The weight of it in my palm was cold and solid, unexpectedly heavy. I meant to call out, to show the others this clear proof that we were not the first, but a strange reticence took hold of me. A piece of whittled wood could have come from anywhere, a relic lost from a passing boat, scrubbed clean by 1,000 miles of sea and time. It could be nothing. Harlock would have to file a report. Procedures would kick in. Our lucrative contract might be voided on a piece of driftwood. So I did the other thing, the thing I cannot entirely explain. I slid the carving into my hip pouch. The sun bled at the horizon. We sat by the fire, eating rations in silence. Eris spoke of his specimens, but his excitement was gone, drained by the island's dead quiet. Night fell, total and crushing. In my tent, nylon the only barrier, I heard it. Faint, deep, slow. Thump, thump, thump. The beating of a drum. I opened my eyes. The sound vanished. Only the sea and Eris's breathing beside me remained. I couldn't tell if I had dreamed the sound or not. I unzipped the tent. Riggs sat on watch, rifle across his lap, a silhouette by the dead fire. I zipped the tent back and wished for morning. Dawn came grudgingly. Harlock stretched outside his tent. "Sleep well?" he asked. Felt like a tomb. I said, "Did anyone hear anything last night, like a drum beat?" Harlock paused, eyes narrowing. "I thought I heard something. Around 0200. Figured it was the generator or waves." "You heard it too." Marcus crawled out, ashen. "I heard it. From the center of the island. Creeped me out." Iris followed, only nodding. He knew that beat wasn't natural. Riggs was unmoved. "I heard it," he said, flat. Sat and listened for 2 hours. One drum. Slow, from inland. Then it stopped. One word stuck in my mind. "Inhabited." "All right," Harlock said. His voice was all command now. "Plan stays the same, but with one change. We stick together. All of us. No splitting up. We'll follow the creek bed inland towards the plateau. Get a sense of the topography. Map the water source. Leo, you map. Eris, you catalog. Marcus, get the drone up as soon as we're under the canopy. Riggs, you stay frosty. If this island ain't as empty as the brass thinks, I want to know about it yesterday. We left the relative safety of the beach, and the jungle took us. The trees were old and vast, their crowns a woven roof that sealed out the sky and plunged the world into a perpetual green gloom. The pale green fungus was everywhere, clinging to rocks and trunks. We hadn't gone a quarter mile when Eris put a finger to the bark of a tree that had no name in his books. "Look at this," he said, his voice a whisper. He traced the lines of deep gashes cut into the wood, scrape markings. A spiral. See it almost identical to the patterns on some Neolithic standing stones in Orkney. But these look fresh. It was the same spiral as the idol I carried in my pouch. A cold sickness began to turn in my gut. We went on, deeper into that green twilight. Marcus fought for a signal, tilting his controller at the oppressive roof of the world, walking in circles. He moved toward a small break. Got it. There's a gap, sending her up. The machine's whine rose and was quickly swallowed by the immensity of the forest. On the small screen, we saw the gray-green, monstrous hide of the island. Wait, Marcus said, leaning into the screen. There's a dead zone. Straight in the middle, like a perfect circle of static. My drone sensors are getting fried. Magnetic interference, maybe. No, it's not. His words were cut off. The image on the screen died, replaced by a blast of white noise. Shit, lost the signal. It just went dead. His thumbs flew over the controls. The drone isn't responding to return to home protocol. She's gone. The drone, our eye in the sky, was gone, lost to the island's blind heart. An hour passed. The creek bed devolved into a trough of sucking mud. Riggs walked point, his M4 held at a low ready. Suddenly, he stopped. He raised a hand in a silent, clenched fist. We all halted behind him. He beckoned us forward without looking back, and we saw what he saw. It was a pit dug into the black earth of the jungle floor, 10 feet across, hidden beneath a frail, artful weaving of leaves and branches. The bottom was a bed of sharpened stakes, their points hardened in some fire, angled to receive a falling body. It was a trap made for something large, something heavy, but it wasn't the trap itself that froze the blood. In the center of the pit, a length of rusted chain was staked to the earth. From the chain, there dangled a human skull. It was weathered, its empty sockets choked with green moss. Back to the beach. "Now," Harlock said. His voice was quiet, deadly. "Pack it all. We're leaving." Ethelred gets their report from the boat. We tell them the island's inhabited and lethal. No one argued. The return journey was a nightmare. The silence of the jungle was no longer passive. It was observant. Riggs walked much of the way backward, his rifle tracing arcs through the gloom. We broke from the tree line onto the black sand, gasping in the gray open air. And then we saw our camp. Our 3 orange tents still stood in a neat triangle, but there was now a 4th structure among them. It was a teepee of lashed branches and cured hides. Animal hides, I thought at first, until my eye caught the faded blue ink of a crude ship's anchor tattoo upon a piece of skin stretched tautly between 2 poles. Before this grotesque construction, a crude altar had been made. Upon it, our satellite phone and our emergency beacon were piled like offerings, smashed to a glittering ruin of plastic and wire. And standing sentry over this desecration was a totem, 6 feet tall and carved from the same dark, heavy wood as the idol in my pouch. In the spiral where its face should have been were set 2 discs of polished mother of pearl. They caught the flat, gray light and glittered like intelligent, malicious eyes. Someone had been to our camp. They had walked among our things. They had judged our tools, our links to the world we knew, and found them wanting. Then they had built their own temple on the ashes of our technology. The rifle in Riggs's hands swung toward the black wall of the jungle as if some shape could be discerned there. But there was only the trees and the dark between the trees. Harlock stood with his seaman's certainty scoured from him. What was left was only the face of an old, frightened man. "Get that thing down," he said, his voice thin and hollow against the ceaseless crash of the waves, gesturing to the tattooed hide. No one moved. We just looked at the sheet of flayed skin, the faded blue anchor, a horrifying testament to the man it had been stripped from. The wind stirred it, and it seemed a thing of ghastly life. "Marcus," Harlock said, the command back in his voice, a splinter of it anyway. "Get a fire going, a big one." Eris, get the medical kit. Make sure we have everything ready to go. Leo, help Riggs fortify this position. Use the supply cases, whatever we have. They funneled themselves through our camp once. If they come at us again, they'll come from the trees, onto this beach. We'll have a clear line of sight. Reluctantly, we put our hands on their totem, on the cured flesh. A profanation we were made party to as we tore it down. We built a low wall from the hard cases of our gear. The great spiral-faced totem we left where it stood. We had no strength to move it. Its mother-of-pearl eyes stared out at the sea, a silent witness to our folly. The sun went down. It did not set so much as bleed out, and all the warmth of the world was drawn away with it. The fire Marcus built was a roaring, hungry thing that tore a hole in the coming dark and cast our shadows long and dancing against the black sand. The tree line was a solid wall of black, empty. Riggs stood behind our low wall, as still as the rock around us. Harlock tended to the flare gun, counting the 3 shells. Aris sat staring into the flames, muttering the Latin names of his specimens, and I felt the weight of the idol in my pouch. The darkness became absolute. The silence of the jungle returned. And then the drums began. They were closer now. They rose not just from the center of the island, but from all sides. Then a wail began, a high, thin sound that was the shape of a human voice but held nothing human in it. It climbed and fell on a scale of wrong notes, a dirge and a battle cry sung as one. "Oh my God," Marcus whimpered. "What the hell is that?" "That isn't a human voice," Eris said, his voice shaking. The scientist in him vanished. "The pitch, the resonance, it isn't being made by human lungs. The physiology is wrong. It's impossible." "The drumming," I hissed. "It's what I heard before." "But this is new. Sounds like they're gutting something," Harlock muttered grimly. "Like they're hurting it." "Slow." "Misdirection," Riggs said, his own voice low and shockingly calm. "All this noise is to fix our attention on the jungle. To make us look in one place." "Misdirection," Marcus shrieked. "Who gives a fuck about our attention? Do you seriously think what we're hearing right now is anything remotely human?" Riggs didn't turn. His head gave a single, almost imperceptible shake. "No," he said, his voice flat. "I don't think so, but it wants us to think the threat is coming from the trees." And then, as if on command, the wails and drums stopped. Abruptly, we waited. The fire crackled and spat. In the black wall of the jungle, the pale green fungus began its cold, slow pulse. Marcus shot to his feet, a wraith in the firelight, his face a pale oval of pure panic. I gotta take a piss," he stammered, his body visibly betraying him. "No," Harlock snarled, grabbing his arm. "You'll do it right there." He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder at the open sand behind them. 10 feet away, where we can see you. Nobody leaves the light from this fire. Nobody! Marcus stumbled to the edge of the light, his shoulders hunched. He turned his back to us and faced the black water. The drums started again. 1, then 2. The wails joined in. They quickened, rising to a singular piercing shriek. All sound was a wall pointed at the jungle, and we all instinctively looked there, our hearts pounding. We missed the one sound that came from the sea. There was no cry from Marcus, only a wet and heavy thud, as of a dropped sack of meat. Then a sickening crack, like a heavy stick snapped clean over a knee. Then nothing. "Marcus," I said into the renewed silence. No answer. The drums and the wailing fell away. Slowly, we all turned. His tracks were clear in the sand, a path from the fire to the water's edge, but the boy was gone. In the place where he had stood, there was a single severed hand. A sound tore from Eris's throat. In that single moment of our shared, frozen horror, a shape bled out of the blackness between the trees. It was tall and thin as a starved dog, hung with wet, dripping netting. Its movements were not the fluid motions of a man, but a series of disjointed, bird-like jerks. Riggs swung the rifle toward it, but he had already lost. 2 more shapes rose silently from the rocks at the far end of the beach. One of them swung its arm, and a weighted net spun through the firelit air. It coiled around Riggs's neck and chest, and his head snapped back with the sound of a whip crack. The rifle fell from his hands into the sand. He clawed at his throat as the rope drew taut. They dragged him backward over the beach, his heels gouging 2 dark furrows in the sand until the darkness took him. For a moment, We saw them clearly. The gleam of wet skin, the long, wrong shape of their limbs, and faces that were not faces but masks of woven wood and shell. I scrabbled for the fallen rifle in the sand. Harlock raised the flare gun, a last desperate defiance, but the night had already swallowed them. The sound of Riggs's choking was gone, and in its place, the slow, methodical beat of a single drum began again. We had been 5 men on this beach. Now we were 3, the fire roared on, oblivious. Out on the wet sand, the tide was coming in, licking at the edges of Marcus's hand. Riggs's rifle was a dark shape half sunk in the grit. Eris folded in on himself and was sick, the contents of his stomach steaming on the black sand. Harlock stood like a man who had been struck by lightning and lived. All the life burned out of him save for some stubborn core that would not let him fall. Then he blinked, and the captain was there again in the hollows of his eyes. "The boat," he said, his voice a dry rasp of sand and shell. "The dinghy. It's our only chance. To hell with the mission, to hell with the gear, we take the dinghy and we get to the Odyssey. The ship, our world. A half-mile of open water away. Iris Leo, grab the go bags." Harlock's command cut through the fog of terror. Essentials only. Water, med kit, and the flare gun. Nothing else. "We go now." We moved in a broken, stumbling line toward the dark slash in the rock where the boat was hidden. Iris wept without sound as he went, his head turning again and again to the black wall of the jungle where nothing moved. I scooped up Riggs's rifle from the sand, and its weight was unfamiliar and terrible. My hands shook on the stock, and I knew if a target presented itself, I would miss. Harlock went first, the flare gun clutched in his fist like a talisman. The drums were silent now, which was somehow worse. I could feel them moving with us in the dark beyond our sight, pacing us. We reached the inlet, and the boat was there. Untouched, tucked between the rocks as we had left it, the dark water lapping at its rubber sides. Get in, Harlock hissed. His fingers were stiff and stupid on the mooring rope. I threw the bags in, the rifle, and helped pull a trembling Eris over the side. Harlock put his shoulder to the bow and gave a great grunting shove. We slid out into the water. He leaped aboard, landing with a heavy thud, his back to me as he clawed at the pull cord of the outboard motor. It was then I saw it. I was facing the beach, the rifle uselessly across my knees. A lone figure stood at the edge of the trees. He was not coming for us. He stood in utter stillness, holding a long spear. He was watching us go. He was letting us go. "Harlock, they're letting us go. It's a trap," I screamed, but he did not hear me over his own frantic efforts. He gave the cord one great desperate pull. The engine choked, sputtered, coughed, and then it caught. The roar of it was the finest sound I had ever heard. The boat jumped and we were moving, planing over the chop, leaving the cove and its horrors behind us. Relief came over me so pure and absolute it was like a kind of death. We were clear. We were away. The lights. "Leo, where are the Odyssey's lights?" Harlock shouted. He had to turn his head and yell it over the engine's scream. My blood, which had been boiling with adrenaline, turned to cold slush. I scanned the dark horizon. There was nothing, maybe an electrical fault. Eris stammered, his voice thin. "A short no," Harlock said, his voice grim. He guided us out beyond the breakers where the reef fell away into the deep. Her backup generator would have kicked in instantly. The emergency lighting is on a separate circuit. We peered out into the night. And then we saw her, not a silhouette of lights, but a silhouette of black against black. The Odyssey was turned on her side like a dying whale, her deck already drinking the sea. She was going down by the prow into the black water. Even from 100 yards out, we could see the gash in her side, a great ragged wound at the waterline. Worse. Drifting in the water around our sinking ship were other boats, 6 or 7 of them. Crude rafts of logs lashed together with vine. On each raft sat the dark, still figures of the island's folk, their paddles resting across their laps. They watched our approach, their bodies slick and black in the moonlight. They had scuttled our world, our only means of escape, and then they had waited, patient as stones, for us to motor into their killing ground. The figure on the beach had not been watching us escape. He had been sending us out to the net. Harlock killed the motor. The world fell silent but for the groaning of the ship as it went under and the soft dip and splash of paddles as the circle began to close. We floated in a child's rubber boat under a bone-white moon, surrounded. There was no shore to run to. This was the end of the map. The world became the small rubber boat, the dark water, and the closing circle of paddles that dipped and rose with a hypnotizing rhythm. Their faces came into view under the moon, and they were things of nightmare, maps of ritual scarification that mimicked the ripple of water or the grain of wood. Masks of jawbone lashed together with what looked like human hair. One of them, on the nearest raft, looked directly at me and grinned. Its teeth were filed to sharpened points. They wore the island's phosphorescent fungus on their skin, smeared into spiral patterns on their chests and arms, and they glowed with a cold and living light. They were creatures not of the world I knew. Harlock's hands shook so badly on the flare gun that he dropped it into the bottom of the boat. Eris was a folded shape, rocking slowly back and forth, a low keen escaping his lips. I brought the rifle up, the stock cold against my cheek, but there was no single target, only a shifting constellation of dark, glowing forms upon the water. Before I could choose a death to deal, one who stood as a leader, taller than the others, a mantle of bird feathers on his shoulders, raised a long-fingered hand. The webs between his digits were stark and pale in the moonlight. All the paddles ceased their motion. A gaffing pole of sharpened wood was thrust from the nearest raft. Its point sank into the pliable skin of our dinghy with a soft sigh of escaping air. They began to draw us toward them. We saw the trophies then, hung about their bodies as adornments, necklaces of finger bones, belts of braided human hair. One wore shin guards carved from human tibias. Another, a pauldron of flayed skin upon his shoulder. On that skin, I could see the dim, faded blue and red lines of a roaring dragon tattoo. Riggs's tattoo, a heavy net, woven from some coarse and heavy vine, was cast over us. Hands took hold of me and pulled me from the boat. They were not angry hands. There was a practiced, cold economy of motion to them, the work of men who knew their craft. A stone club rose and fell, and Harlock went limp. Ropes of tough fiber bit into my wrists and ankles. Eris did not resist at all. And all this was done in a chilling quiet, broken only by the lapping of the water against the rafts. Then they turned their craft not toward the beach we had fled, but to a dark wound in the cliffs where a river bled out into the sea. They navigated the rafts into that river mouth, and we entered the belly of the island. The air grew thick and wet and held the smell of rot and damp earths. In alcoves carved from the stone, we saw their world. We passed one where a hunched figure was patiently working a human femur on a grinding stone. We passed another that served as their larder. From bone hooks in the ceiling hung the flayed shapes of men in parts, and among them, I saw the remains of a bright red jacket, and I knew that Marcus was here. Further on, old women with faces like dried gourds stretched sheets of skin on wooden frames to cure them in the damp air. The river opened into a cavern so vast its roof was lost to darkness. In the center of this great vault stood a tree. It was a banyan, ancient and monstrous, its roots clawing at the cavern floor while its upper branches scraped the unseen ceiling. Platforms and huts of bone and woven hide were built upon its limbs, connected by swinging bridges of rope, and from its trunk and from every branch, like grotesque fruit, there hung a skull. Hundreds of them, thousands. We were dragged from the rafts and prodded up a wide ramp that spiraled around the great trunk, 70 feet up. We came to a central platform where the tribe was gathered. They swayed to a silent rhythm before a shaman figure who chanted in a language of clicks and guttural stops. Eris and Harlock, awake now and naked and pale with a terror beyond screaming, were bound spread-eagled to two large X-shaped frames of wood. Our survey equipment, our cameras and cases, was laid at the foot of the frames like an offering to whatever god they worshipped. The shaman held aloft the small carving I had found by the creek, the spiral-headed man, and a great, sighing moan passed through the gathered crowd. He approached Eris first, a knife in his hand. He made shallow cuts upon Eris's chest, painting his own fingers with the blood to mark Eris's cheeks with symbols. Eris only wept, his eyes looking past all of us into the final distance. Then the shaman knelt and, with two quick slashes, severed the tendons behind his knees. The scream that came from Eris then was a pure and terrible thing that echoed from the stone walls. They took the skin from him in long, careful ribbons while the life still shuddered in him. And when he was only a red ruin of a man, the shaman put a spear through his heart. A great, ecstatic cheer rose from the tribe. They turned to Harlock next. They took a brand from a smoking brazier, a flat stone carved with their spiral sign, and pressed it to his lips to seal them shut. They burned out his eyes. They used heavy stones to break his hands and his feet, and my last sight of the captain was of a blind and ruined thing weeping blood and smoke. Then they raised his frame up, and a dozen spears flew from the crowd to thud into his body. He was dead before the 10th spear found him. They cheered his passing more loudly still. I was next. It was my turn. They came for me and cut the bonds on my feet. I felt their cold, strong hands on my arms, dragging me toward the last empty frame. My mind was a white sheet of noise. A scream began to build in my throat. A denial of the fact that my skull would soon be just another fruit on that terrible and godless tree. They hauled me toward the vacant frame. I was kicking and sobbing, and then I was not. The hot wires of the brain God gives you for fear were burnt away in that moment, and what was left was pure animal rage. They thought I would be another lamb for their altar, but they had not reckoned what an animal will do when it's cornered. I would not die. Not like this. Two of them had me by the arms. My eyes cast about the cleared ground for a stone or a shard of wood, but there was nothing. Nothing but the hard, packed earth and the bone-strewn frames and the red work they meant to do. One of them turned to get new cords, and his grip on my arm slacked for a single beat of a heart. It was enough. I let my weight go limp. I fell into the creature's guard, and my teeth found his forearm. I closed upon the gristle there with a taste of old earth and corruption. He screamed, a high, sharp sound that broke the ordained rhythm of the slaughter. A silence of surprise fell over the tribe. My teeth were buried to the bone in him, and I tore my head away, taking a knot of his flesh with me. I used the violent motion to drive the back of my skull into the face of the second one holding me. I felt the wet snap of bone beneath skin, and he reeled back, clutching at his ruined nose. They both fell away from me, and the world opened up. For a moment I was a free man under that dark stone ceiling. A raw cathedral of rage echoed around me. The way down the ramp was choked with their forms, but to the side, a single thick vine, a rope bridge, snaked its way from the main platform toward a lesser hut lodged in the great trunk of the tree. There was no choice in it. To stay was to die. To fall was to die. It was the only way that was not death. One of the tribesmen, recovering from his shock, came at me with a knife. He drove it down, and it scribed a line of fire along my ribs. But I caught his arm and turned his own momentum against him. We went down in a tangle of limbs, crashing against a carved wooden pole that stood at the platform's edge. The dozens of smaller bones threaded onto it chattered like dry seeds in a gourd. The pole was rotten at its base. It swayed on its foundation, and then it went over with the sound of old wood giving up its ghost. It fell not upon the platform, but out into the void, and its falling weight took the far anchor of that rope bridge with it in a final parting. The rope whipped violently through the air, striking the knot of men coming for me and sweeping 3 of them from their feet. I didn't hesitate. I ran and leaped over the edge. For a terrifying space I fell, and then my feet hit the swinging rope bridge with a jarring shock. I fought for my balance upon that bucking cord, grabbing for a hold on its rough weave. I looked down into the murk of the cavern floor, and I saw it. Amidst a pile of salvaged driftwood and ship's refuse at the water's edge, I saw a block of alien yellow, our emergency life raft. I half climbed, half slid down the rope. My hands were raw and bleeding. A spear cast from above whistled past my ear and shattered on the stone beside me. I hit the floor and my knees buckled. My side was a sheet of warm blood and slick mud. I looked up and saw their dark shapes already swarming down the great tree, moving down the trunk and its network of ropes with a speed that was not human. I had seconds. I lunged for the bright yellow pack and ran for the black mouth of the river. The river took me in a cold so absolute it seemed to be the very marrow of the stone itself. I kicked out into the black water with the pack clutched to my chest, paddling through a tunnel lit only by the swimming ghosts of strange phosphorescent fish. Then I was through the cave and into the night, the sea. Above me, the clouds had broken, and the moon was a splinter of bone in the sky. But they were coming. Their crude rafts were already in the water behind me. The sound of their paddles, a frantic drumming that drew ever closer. I tore at the ripcord of the raft with numb, useless fingers. Twice it slipped my grasp. The lead raft came on fast, and I saw the scarred man in the prow raise a harpoon against the moonlight. With a final sobbing effort, I pulled the cord, a hiss of compressed air, and the bladder bloomed a sudden yellow wound upon the dark water. I hauled myself over the side as the first spear struck the sea beside me with a violent splash. With my bare hands, I began to paddle, a lone soul afloat between the black water and the black and star-dusted firmament, putting the shore of blood behind me and setting out into the great and awful benediction of the sea. I was alive and adrift on the sea, and there was nothing else. Behind me, the great black stone of that place receded until it was only a rumor on the edge of the world. The shrieks of the painted men faded, and then they were gone. There was only the sloshing of the water against the yielding walls of this yellow coffin. I curled myself into the smallest shape I could upon the floor of the raft. My body trembled with the violence I couldn't control. The faces of the tribe were burnt into the back of my eyelids, the sound of Eris screaming. The wet thudding of the spears into the meat of Harlock's chest. My friends were made into holy relics and into meat, and I wept for them and for myself. The sun came up out of the sea with a terrible beauty. The water was calm. Ethel's rock was gone from the horizon. I took a reckoning of what was left. This raft, this deep red rent in my side, which I packed with a scrap of cloth from my torn shirt. No food, no water. The days and the nights blended into one long hallucinatory state. The sun burned a merciless path across the sky, and then it was dark. Thirst was the first and oldest god, a patient demon that had come to live in my throat. I would conjure from the sun-scorched theater of my mind the image of a glass of cold water, of water running from a tap, only to have the mirage evaporate into burning salt. Hunger came later, a dull and distant cousin to the thirst, in the crushing solitude between the abyss below and the brass bowl of the sky. My mind began to come apart. I spoke to the dead as if they sat with me. You should have seen the tide charts I drew up. Harlock, I would say to the empty boat. Perfectly calculated. I consulted with the shade of Eris on the tribe's anthropology. Extreme isolation leading to ritualistic aggression, I would say to him, but his ghost only stared out upon the water, his eyes full of a sorrow I could not fathom. The specter of Riggs stood silent watch on the prow of my raft, and beneath me, sometimes, I could hear the chattering of Marcus's teeth. Sometimes I saw them on the horizon, the dark shapes of their rafts, paddling in the heat shimmer. Patient, implacable. Or perhaps they were only waves. The sharks came too, their gray fins parting the water near the boat. They would circle for hours, patient, waiting for the yellow cocoon to finally give up its dead. I did not know how many days had passed. The sun had burned my skin away. The wound in my side was a putrid fire that lit my dreams and made my brain feel as if it were cooking within my skull. The waking world was a fever dream, and there was no difference between them. The raft had turned to a thing of pulsing fungus, and my dead friends no longer offered their counsel but joined the silent, jeering chorus of the tribe. Their skeletal shapes danced upon the waves with my own, and their eyes were burnt black holes like Harlock's. I was on my back in that boat, the stars wheeling above me in a dance of cold, indifferent fire, and I believe I was ready for the end to take me. I began to close my eyes against the uncaring night, and I saw it, a single point of steady light where there should be none. For a long time, I regarded it as I had regarded the other ghosts, as a final trick of the dying brain. But the light grew. It did not waver. It blinked at a measured, mechanical pace, with an effort that cost me what felt like the last of my life. I sat up. The world went to black spots before my eyes, then resolved, a freighter, a container ship, moving upon the black water like some great beast of iron from a world I could no longer remember. Its lights were a city afloat in the darkness. It was sweeping the water, slow and methodical, and a low horn note sounded from it that was the most beautiful sound that had ever been. I tried to cry out, but my voice was a dry clicking in my throat and would not answer my command. But they saw me. A great beam of light cut across the black water and fell upon me. I heard the cries of men in a tongue I knew, distorted by the water but real. Real tears traced clean paths through the grime and salt and sun scourge of my face. They brought me aboard. I recall the miracle of a bottle of cool water being pressed to my lips, the feel of a clean blanket. And then I passed out. I have a clean bed and food and 4 walls around me. But in the long, quiet hours of the night, I am not in any room. I am still upon the sea, swimming for the river's maw. I am still on the platform, watching the butchery of Eris. I see Harlock in the smoking ruin of his eyes. I am still pressed against the bark of the ossuary tree, and the ghosts of those painted priests stand a final, silent watch over me. The company filed it all as a tragic loss. 5 men, a state-of-the-art research vessel, all lost to a sudden, unforecasted storm at sea. It was a neater story. They gave me money for my trouble, a generous sum paid into an offshore account, and papers to sign that would seal my tongue forever. It was an easier thing for them than to confess that they had charted a corner of hell, and that I was its only soul returned. I carry the island in me now. It is a part of my salt and my blood. I am adrift always on that yellow raft, in the great silent ocean of what I have seen, and in the darkest part of the night, when all the world is asleep and I am terribly awake, I can sometimes hear it, faint and far away. The lonely beat of a drum.